In the cold, dark emptiness of space, there was something that didn't belong. The crew aboard the ship Endurance had been cruising through the galactic void, studying distant stars and planets. It had been a quiet mission. That is, until they found something that would change everything. It all started with a simple scan, a routine check of nearby space. The captain, Emily Daniels, stared at the holographic display, her eyes narrowing. A strange, unidentifiable signal was coming from a sector no one had explored. The signal was faint but unmistakable. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was something. Someone was trying to communicate. And that someone wasn't human. Set a course for the source of the signal, Captain Daniels ordered. The crew scrambled into action. It had been over a year since they had encountered any sign of intelligent life. This discovery could change everything. If it was a new species, the possibilities were endless. Humanity could make contact, trade, learn new technology, or perhaps even form alliances. But the thought of what they might find next terrified them all. The Endurance changed course, heading toward the mysterious signal. The farther they traveled, the stronger the signal became. Soon, the crew realized they weren't just following a message. They were heading toward something massive, something powerful. The scanners could barely register the size of what was ahead. It was as if a shadow had cast itself over their path, blocking out all light. "What in the universe?" muttered Lieutenant Zachary Reed, one of the lead engineers, as he looked at the readout. "Captain," said Dr. Lillian Hayes, the ship's scientist, "this isn't a planet. It's a structure. But I've never seen anything like this before. It's as if it doesn't even belong here." The Endurance slowed as they approached the source. The closer they got, the more it became clear. It wasn't just a structure. It was a ship. An enormous ship. But the design was nothing like any human-made vessel. The black metal of its surface seemed to absorb light, making it appear almost invisible against the backdrop of space. The ship was ancient, older than anything humanity had ever seen. As the crew took in the sight, their excitement mixed with fear. Who had built this ship? How long had it been here? What was its purpose? They had no answers, only questions. "Should we dock?" asked Commander Sarah Lee, the ship's second-in-command. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she held onto the console. Captain Daniels hesitated. "Prepare a team. We'll investigate, but stay cautious. We have no idea what we're dealing with." A team was quickly assembled. Captain Daniels, Lieutenant Reed, Dr. Hayes, and Commander Lee. They all geared up and prepared for the unknown. As they boarded the small shuttle, everyone felt the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Their mission had just gone from routine exploration to something much more dangerous. The shuttle approached the black ship, its surface dotted with strange symbols and markings, none of which the crew could understand. It was as if the ship had been designed to hide its secrets. The closer they got, the more the sense of mystery grew. It was too quiet, too still. No signs of life, no communication, no movement. The shuttle docked with the black ship with a low, grinding sound. The crew disembarked, stepping into the unknown. Inside, the atmosphere was dark and cold. The air smelled stale, as if no one had breathed it in for centuries. The walls of the ship seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The crew stepped carefully, their steps echoing through the massive hallways. The ship's design was unlike anything they had ever seen, sleek, alien, and intricate, with winding corridors that twisted in strange, impossible ways. Dr. Hayes led the group, her scanner picking up faint readings. "This technology, it's far beyond anything we've ever developed," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to be careful. This ship wasn't meant for us." They explored deeper into the ship, scanning everything, trying to understand it. Then they reached the heart of the black ship, a massive chamber filled with a low hum that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. At the center of the room was a giant structure, an ancient core, pulsing with a soft blue light. It was connected to the rest of the ship by intricate metallic veins, as if the ship and the core were one living entity. "What is this?" Lieutenant Reed whispered, his hand hovering near the core, as though afraid it might respond to his touch. "We need to shut it down," Dr. Hayes said. "We have no idea what it's capable of." But before they could act, the core suddenly began to glow brighter, casting a blinding light that filled the entire chamber. The ground beneath their feet trembled. The ship seemed to awaken, as if it had been sleeping for centuries, and had finally heard the voices of intruders. A low, mechanical voice echoed from the walls, speaking in a language none of them could understand. "Everyone, get back," Captain Daniels shouted. But it was too late. The ship's systems powered up in an instant, its ancient engines roaring to life. The crew could feel the shift in the air, the power surging through the ship, surrounding them. The black walls began to glow, and strange symbols flickered on the walls, as if the ship was coming alive. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went still again. The glow faded, and the hum of the ship stopped. The crew stood frozen, unsure of what had just happened. "What the hell was that?" Commander Lee asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Captain Daniels replied, her voice shaky. "But I have a feeling we just activated something. Something big." The crew stood in silence, their hearts racing. The black ship was no longer just an ancient relic. It was a weapon, a power beyond anything humanity could have imagined. And now, it was awake. They had no idea what it would do next, but one thing was certain: this discovery would change everything. Outside, in the darkness of space, a shadow loomed. Unseen, but not unfelt. Other ships, alien in origin, had detected the ship's awakening. The galaxy would soon know what humanity had found, and they would not be the only ones coming to claim it. The stage had been set. The true story was just beginning. The crew of the Endurance stood in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. The black ship, which had been dormant for who knows how long, had come alive at their touch. The hum of its systems resonated through the walls, and the eerie glow of the core had filled the chamber with an otherworldly light. Captain Daniels' mind raced, filled with 1,000 questions. What was this ship? Who had built it? Why had it remained hidden for so long? And most importantly, what did it want from them? As the crew gathered their bearings, Dr. Hayes began scanning the core again, trying to get a better read on what had just activated. But the scanner was picking up strange interference. The data was unreadable, distorted by something deep within the ship. "Something's blocking the scans," she muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. "It's like the ship is trying to keep us from understanding it." Lieutenant Reed, who had always been the most level-headed of the team, stepped forward. His eyes scanned the massive chamber around them, noting the symbols on the walls, the glowing veins of metal running through the ship. "Whatever this is, it's not just a ship," he said softly. "It's a fortress, maybe a weapon, and we just triggered it." Captain Daniels nodded grimly. "We need to be careful. Whatever's inside this ship, we might not be prepared for it." Her voice betrayed the weight of her words. The crew had been trained to handle many things, but an ancient alien vessel, possibly with capabilities far beyond anything humanity had encountered, was something they were completely unprepared for. The crew knew they needed to explore further, but they also understood the risk. The Endurance crew had come here seeking knowledge, seeking answers, but now they weren't sure what they had awakened. They proceeded cautiously, moving deeper into the ship, every creak of the metal beneath their feet echoing in the silence. As they ventured through the halls, the air grew colder, and the feeling of being watched settled heavily on their shoulders. The ship was ancient, yet it was clear that something within it was still active, still alive. The strange symbols on the walls began to glow brighter as they approached them, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. It was almost as if the ship was alive, aware of their presence, waiting for them to make their next move. The deeper they went, the more unsettled the crew became. Every turn seemed to lead them to another impossible room or hallway, more complex and more bizarre than the last. Nothing made sense. The layout of the ship defied all logic, twisting and turning in ways that made it impossible to map or predict. It was as if the ship itself was shifting, reacting to their every step. Finally, they'd reached what appeared to be the control center of the ship. The walls were lined with alien technology, gleaming consoles and terminals, all dark and unresponsive, as if they had been shut down for millennia. But one terminal, in the center of the room, was still active. A faint green glow emanated from it, and as they approached, the terminal flickered to life. A holographic projection appeared before them, showing a map of the galaxy, with various systems highlighted in glowing blue. At the center of it all, one planet stood out: Earth. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Was the ship targeting Earth? Had it been waiting for humanity all this time? The possibility was chilling. Before anyone could speak, the hologram shifted. The map zoomed in on a distant, uncharted system. A massive object, something resembling a giant black sphere, hovered just outside the system's star. It was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. They all stared at it, transfixed. The object seemed to pulse with an energy that was both familiar and terrifying. Whatever it wasn't just a relic. It was a weapon that had been dormant for ages, and now it was awake. As the crew stared at the projection, the walls of the control room began to vibrate. The ship was responding. Something was happening. The low hum they had heard earlier grew louder, and the ship began to shift. The core at the heart of the vessel pulsed in time with the energy they were seeing on the map. It was as if the ship was preparing for something big. "Captain," Dr. Hayes said, her voice trembling, "I think we've just discovered a weapon, one that could change everything. This ship, it's not just a relic, it's a war machine." Captain Daniels felt a chill run down her spine. They had come to the black ship seeking answers, but what they had uncovered was far beyond anything they had imagined. And now, the ship had them in its grip. The crew had no choice but to continue exploring, but with every step, the feeling that they were being watched grew stronger. It was as if the ship was alive, and it was waiting for them to make a move. The deeper they ventured into the unknown, the more they realized one undeniable truth: they weren't alone. The ship might have been abandoned, but something, or someone, was still out there, lurking in the darkness. And soon, they would discover just how dangerous this black ship truly was. The crew of the Endurance continued deeper into the heart of the black ship, their steps echoing through the eerily silent halls. As they moved forward, the atmosphere grew thicker with tension, each new room filled with strange alien markings and devices that defied all logic. Dr. Hayes, the ship's lead scientist, couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping over her. The ship's technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, and every inch of the vessel seemed to pulse with an ancient, untapped power. The walls themselves seemed to whisper with energy, crackling faintly as though the ship was alive, feeding on the crew's presence. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and Lieutenant Reed, normally calm and composed, kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. He had the distinct sense that something was lurking just beyond their reach, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. After what seemed like hours of wandering through winding, impossible hallways, they finally reached what appeared to be a central chamber. It was larger than any room they had encountered, its walls lined with massive, glowing runes. In the center of the room stood a large, spherical object, suspended in midair by some unseen force. It was the size of a small moon and radiated an unsettling dark energy that sent shivers down the crew's spines. Captain Daniels stepped forward cautiously, her eyes fixed on the strange object. She could feel its power, its presence, and it made her uneasy. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a mere whisper. Dr. Hayes moved to one of the nearby terminals, frantically typing in commands, but the screen flickered, offering no answers. "I don't know," she muttered, her fingers hovering over the controls. "But whatever it is, it's not something we've seen before." Suddenly, the room trembled, and a low hum filled the air. The spherical object began to shift, slowly at first, but then faster, its surface pulsing with energy. A hologram emerged from its core, and a voice, deep, ancient, and otherworldly, spoke. It was a language they couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a command, a directive. The crew froze. The ship was responding to them, to their presence. It had been dormant for eons, but now it had awakened. Whatever was about to happen, they were no longer in control. The hologram flickered, showing a star system far from their own, with a planet at its center, surrounded by countless ships. The black ship's purpose was becoming clearer. It had been a warship, built for a purpose beyond anything the crew could comprehend. The objects surrounding the planet weren't just ships. They were weapons, prepared for something catastrophic. Dr. Hayes gasped, her eyes wide in horror. "It's showing us a battle," she said, her voice shaky. A war that we weren't meant to see." Captain Daniels took a step back, her heart racing. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a warning. The black ship wasn't just some lost relic, it was a harbinger. And the enemy it had been created to fight had never truly been defeated. The hum of the room intensified, and the crew felt a rush of air as the spherical object began to open. A door, or some kind of gateway, appeared in its center. Beyond it lay an empty chamber, dark, hollow, and yet filled with a presence that made their blood run cold. "What is that?" Lieutenant Reed asked, his voice barely audible. "What's waiting for us?" The door slowly began to close, cutting off the view to whatever lay beyond, leaving the crew with only questions and uncertainty. The tension in the room was unbearable. They had crossed a threshold, and now there was no turning back. The ship was awake, and so was its purpose. As they stared at the now closed doorway, Captain Daniels knew one thing for sure. Whatever was inside, it wasn't meant to be found. And they had just scratched the surface. The crew of the Endurance stood in stunned silence, each member processing the gravity of what they had just discovered. The black ship was far more than they had ever imagined, and the secrets it held were beginning to unravel piece by piece. The spherical object that had activated earlier continued to hum with dark energy, its surface shimmering with strange symbols. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulse in response, as though alive, aware of their every move. Captain Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Even now, standing at the heart of the ship, there was a sense of something far greater lurking just out of sight. The air in the room felt thick, almost oppressive, as if the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next command. "What now?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence that had descended upon them. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension in it that the rest of the crew could hear. "We need to keep moving," Lieutenant Reed replied, his voice barely above a whisper. His usual calm demeanor was beginning to crack, and Captain Daniels noticed how his eyes darted nervously around the chamber. "We can't just stand here forever. The ship, it's alive, and whatever it's preparing for, we need to be ready." Dr. Hayes, her brow furrowed in deep concentration, moved closer to one of the glowing terminals. She was attempting to decipher the symbols on the screen, trying to unlock more of the ship's secrets. But no matter how many times she adjusted the controls, the interface remained frustratingly uncooperative. "There's something blocking the data," she muttered, tapping on the terminal in frustration. "I can't get a full read on anything. The ship's systems are working, but it's like they don't want us to understand them." "Not good," Captain Daniels muttered under her breath. She exchanged a glance with Reed. "Keep trying, Doctor. We need to know what this thing wants." But as they continued to try and interact with the ship's systems, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and a loud, echoing sound rang out from somewhere deep within the ship. It was a grinding noise, almost as though the ship itself was waking up. shifting into motion. The crew looked at each other, alarm flooding their faces. The ship's walls began to shimmer, and for a moment, the entire chamber seemed to warp before their eyes. A hologram appeared before them, an ancient map of the galaxy stretching out, glowing faintly. But unlike before, the map wasn't focused on a distant planet or star system. This time, it was focused on Earth. The image zoomed in, showing Earth in all its glory, surrounded by rings of bright energy, and what appeared to be a fleet of ships encircling the planet. Captain Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What is this?" she whispered, stepping closer to the hologram. The image was so vivid, so real. The ships in the hologram appeared to be immense, each one dwarfing anything humanity had ever built. The symbols etched on their surfaces matched the ones the crew had seen earlier in the ship. This was no coincidence. This was a vision. A warning. Dr. Hayes' voice broke the silence. "This isn't a map. This is a record. It's showing us something that happened, or something that's about to happen." Her fingers hovered over the console, and she tried to zoom in on the ships surrounding Earth. As she did, the image shifted, revealing the massive black sphere at the heart of the fleet. It was the same as the one they had encountered earlier in the chamber, but now it was surrounded by what seemed to be a network of smaller ships, all focused on one thing: Earth. Reed took a step back, his face pale. "They're here," he muttered. "Whatever this ship was built for, it's not over. The fight's still coming." Suddenly, the map shifted again, this time showing Earth's atmosphere in great detail. The ships had arrived, and they were closing in on the planet. It was clear now. This was a warning. Whoever or whatever was on those ships was coming for Earth, and the black ship was part of some greater plan. It wasn't just an ancient warship. It was a weapon, a tool for a much larger conflict that had yet to unfold. "Captain, we need to go," Reed urged, his voice rising in urgency. "We need to get back to the Endurance and report this. If Earth is under threat, we have to warn them." But Captain Daniels remained frozen, her gaze fixed on the hologram. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. "Not yet," she replied, her voice steady but firm. "We need more information. This ship has been dormant for too long. Whatever happened before, it's still happening, and we're not leaving until we find out what we've really uncovered." As the crew continued to stare at the flickering hologram, a sense of dread settled over them. This was no longer just an exploration mission. They had stumbled into something much bigger, something dangerous. The black ship was not just a relic. It was a key, a piece of a puzzle that could change the fate of Earth itself. The hum of the ship grew louder, and the walls seemed to pulse with a new energy. Something was stirring in the depths of the ship, and the crew could feel it. They were no longer alone in the black ship. Whatever had been dormant for centuries was awakening, and it was waiting for them. The tension in the room was palpable. They had come looking for answers, but what they had found was far more than they had ever expected. The black ship's secrets were unfolding, one by one, and the crew could feel the weight of the impending storm bearing down on them. Captain Daniels knew that the only way forward was deeper into the ship. Whatever awaited them in the depths, they had no choice but to face it. And they would need every ounce of strength and courage they had left to survive whatever came next. As the crew moved deeper into the black ship, the sense of unease continued to grow. The corridors twisted and turned, and every step forward seemed to lead them further into the unknown. They had entered the heart of the ship, but it felt like they were trespassing in a place that was never meant to be explored by outsiders. The walls seemed to pulse with an eerie rhythm, almost as if they were alive. And the strange symbols from the map earlier were now appearing on the walls, glowing faintly as they passed by. Captain Daniel's mind raced as she considered what they had uncovered. Whatever had happened in the past was now a part of their reality. The hologram of the ships surrounding Earth, the black sphere at their center. It was all too much to ignore. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. Whoever had built the black ship had intended for it to be more than just a relic. It was a weapon, and its power was greater than anything humanity had ever faced. "Keep moving," Captain Daniels ordered, her voice firm. "We can't stop now. Whatever's ahead, we need to know what it is." The crew nodded silently, their determination matching the captain's resolve. But as they ventured further into the heart of the ship, the atmosphere began to change. The air grew colder, and the hum of the ship grew louder, vibrating in their bones. The black walls seemed to close in around them, narrowing the already tight passageways. The further they went, the more oppressive it became. It felt as if the ship itself was alive, breathing with them, and it was watching them. Suddenly, Dr. Hayes stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with fear. "Captain, look at this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The others turned to see what she was pointing at. A large door, unlike the others they had encountered, stood at the end of the corridor. It was covered in intricate symbols, many of which seemed to match those on the hologram. But what caught their attention was the faint glow that pulsed from behind it, casting an eerie light into the corridor. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. "What is that?" Lieutenant Reed asked, his voice barely audible. Captain Daniels took a deep breath, stepping forward. "We're about to find out." With a press of a button on the console beside the door, it slowly slid open, revealing a vast chamber unlike anything they had seen before. The room was circular, its walls lined with advanced technology that hummed and pulsed with energy. In the center of the room stood a massive pedestal, upon which rested a strange, glowing orb, the same black sphere they had seen in the hologram earlier. But now it was more than just an image. It was real. And it was right in front of them. The crew stood in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the orb as it pulsed with a strange energy. It was as if the ship itself had been leading them to this point, guiding them toward this object. This was the key. This was the source of the power they had been searching for. Captain Daniels felt a chill run down her spine as she stepped closer to the pedestal. The orb seemed to resonate with her presence, its glow intensifying as she reached out to touch it. But just as her fingers were about to make contact, the air around them grew heavy, and the lights flickered. Something was happening. A voice echoed through the chamber, low and resonant. It wasn't from any of the crew members. It came from the ship itself. "You should not have come here," the voice said, the words laced with an ancient authority. The crew froze, fear gripping their hearts. It was not a voice they recognized, and yet it felt familiar, like it had been waiting for them. Captain Daniels' mind raced. "Who? What are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She had expected the ship to be a mystery, but she hadn't anticipated encountering a presence, an intelligence, within the ship itself. The voice responded, its tone deep and foreboding. "I am the Black Ship. I was created to serve, but now I am the keeper of the ancient power, the power that you have awakened." Dr. Hayes gasped. "We've awakened something. What is it?" The voice continued, "You have disturbed forces that should remain dormant. The power within this ship was not meant to be unleashed. But now that you have come, you must understand. The war that is to come will be unlike anything your species has ever faced. The Black Ship is the key to your survival, or your destruction." The room grew colder, and the energy in the orb intensified, casting strange shadows along the walls. The crew was paralyzed, caught between awe and fear. This was no ordinary discovery. They were no longer just explorers. They were now participants in a conflict that stretched back further than humanity could possibly comprehend. "Why Earth?" Captain Daniels asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why is Earth the target?" The voice did not answer immediately. There was a long pause, and the crew could hear the sound of the ship's systems whirring, as though it was processing their questions. "The time has come for Earth to choose," the voice finally replied. "Choose to stand with the power of the Ancient Ones, or be swept aside by forces beyond your control. The Black Ship will either be your salvation or your doom." The chamber fell silent once more, and the crew stood frozen in place, their minds racing with the implications of what they had just heard. The stakes had never been higher. The black ship had not only awakened a long-dormant power, but it had also set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of history. Captain Daniels turned to her crew, her face set with determination. "We've come too far to turn back now. We need to find a way to control this power. Whatever happens next, we can't let Earth become a battleground." The crew nodded in agreement, their resolve solidifying. The black ship had shown them its secrets, but now it was up to them to decide how to use its power. Would they rise to the challenge, or would they fall to the ancient forces that had been awakened? The fate of humanity rested in their hands, and as they prepared to face what lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. The crew gathered in the command room, their faces grim. The implications of what they had just learned weighed heavily on their shoulders. The black ship was no longer just a mysterious vessel. It was an ancient weapon, and its awakening meant that forces far beyond their understanding were now focused on Earth. Captain Daniels stood at the head of the table, eyes narrowed, lost in thought. "Captain," Lieutenant Reed spoke up, breaking the silence. "What do we do now? We've uncovered something far bigger than we expected. How do we control this power? How do we fight something like this?" Captain Daniels looked at the map displayed on the holographic screen in front of them. The path they had taken through the ship had led them to this point, but the next steps weren't clear. "We can't control what we don't understand," she said softly, "and we're still far from understanding it. But we can learn. We have to." The ship's systems hummed quietly, as if in agreement. The black ship seemed to be alive with its own intelligence. Captain Daniels knew that this wasn't just a technological marvel. It was a living, breathing entity that had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. But as much as it had offered them knowledge, it had also placed them in the middle of a deadly game they didn't fully comprehend. "We need to figure out what this ship's true purpose is," Dr. Hayes added, looking over the data she had been gathering. "It's clear that the black ship has its own agenda, but we're only scratching the surface. If we're going to survive this, we need to understand what we're dealing with, what forces are coming for Earth, and why." The crew nodded in agreement. They were explorers, yes, but now they were also humanity's first line of defense. The war that the voice had spoken of wasn't just some distant threat. It was real, and it was already beginning. "We need to locate more of the ship's data cores," Captain Daniels instructed. "If the black ship has the answers, we need to find them. Dr. Hayes, you're in charge of deciphering the data. Reed, I need you and the others to secure the ship. We can't let anything happen to it." The crew members went to their respective stations, but the air in the room remained tense. They knew the stakes had never been higher. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for the survival of Earth itself. Hours passed, and the crew worked tirelessly, combing through the ship's vast archives. The black ship's secrets were buried deep, and with every discovery, the weight of their situation grew heavier. The voice that had spoken to them in the chamber was a constant presence in their minds, echoing with its ominous warning. Earth would have to choose. Captain Daniels felt the weight of that choice pressing on her shoulders. She had always known that humanity was capable of great things, but nothing had prepared her for this. The power the black ship contained could change everything, if they could harness it. But the cost of failure was unimaginable. "Captain," Dr. Hayes called out from her station, "you need to see this." Daniels hurried over to her side, and the holographic screen flickered to life with an ancient map of the galaxy. At the center of the map was Earth, but surrounding it were dark, swirling clouds, representing the unknown forces that threatened their world. The symbols they had seen earlier now appeared again, forming a complex pattern that seemed to reach out from the map, connecting Earth to a series of distant, mysterious star systems. "This is the key," Dr. Hayes said, her voice filled with awe. "The black ship wasn't just a weapon, it was a guide. It's been waiting for us to unlock its power. This map, it's showing us the way. The forces coming for Earth, they're not just out there, they're already here. The war has begun. Captain Daniels stared at the map, her heart pounding. It was all real. The danger was no longer hypothetical. It was imminent. "We have to act quickly," Daniels said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her. "We don't know how much time we have, but we can't wait around to find out. Let's prepare to leave the black ship and head back to Earth. We need to warn humanity, and we need to be ready." "But Captain," Lieutenant Reed spoke up again, his voice hesitant. "What about the black ship? What happens if we just leave it behind? What if the powers that created it come looking for it? What if they come looking for us?" The room fell silent as everyone considered the question. It was a risk they hadn't fully thought through. The black ship wasn't just a ship, it was a potential target, and if they left it behind, they might be inviting even greater danger. "We'll take it with us," Daniels said, her voice firm. "We won't leave Earth unprotected. The black ship might be the only thing standing between us and whatever's coming. We'll figure it out when we get back. But we need to move fast." The crew nodded in agreement, knowing that their choices now would shape the future of humanity. The ship had shown them its secrets, but now it was up to them to decide how to use them. As they prepared to leave the black ship behind, they knew that they weren't just leaving with the technology. It was leaving with them. The fate of Earth depended on how they wielded its power. And in that moment, as they made their preparations, Captain Daniels knew one thing for sure. The war for Earth was just beginning. The black ship had revealed its power, but now they had to face the consequences of awakening it. There was no turning back. As the crew prepared to depart from the black ship, a sense of urgency filled the air. Captain Daniels stood at the command center, staring out into the vast unknown. They were about to leave the ship behind, but it wasn't the ship that worried her. It was the unknown enemies who were already aware of their presence. The forces that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment, would be coming for them. And they weren't ready. Not yet. "We don't have the luxury of time," Daniels muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning the holographic map that continued to show the swirling darkness surrounding Earth. The map didn't just indicate threats from distant star systems. It was a warning. The darkness was growing, closing in on them. Dr. Hayes had been working nonstop, trying to decode the secrets of the black ship's maps and data. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but she didn't stop. She knew they were close to uncovering something critical. "It's all connected," she said suddenly, interrupting the quiet hum of the room. "The map, the ships we saw before, it's not just a warning. It's a countdown, and we're running out of time." Daniels felt a chill run down her spine. The map had changed subtly, as if it were adjusting itself to the crew's actions, guiding them toward a path that had been set long before they arrived. She could feel the weight of the ship's ancient history pressing down on her. It wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a weapon and a tool, and now it was part of their fight. "We need to get back to Earth," Captain Daniels said firmly, shaking off the uncertainty that had settled in. "The sooner, the better. We've unlocked the ship's map, but we don't fully understand what we're dealing with yet. But Earth needs to be prepared. We'll need every weapon, every ally we can get." The crew began moving in an almost synchronized manner, their training kicking in. They had already loaded the necessary supplies, and the black ship's vast technological wonders were packed, ready for the return journey. But despite their preparations, there was a lingering question that no one dared ask aloud. Would they make it back to Earth before the forces the black ship had warned them about arrived? The space station they had docked with earlier would be their jump-off point, but even as they moved toward it, they knew that the journey ahead wasn't just physical. The weight of the unknown hung over them like a shadow, reminding them that the true test of humanity's strength had only just begun. As the black ship's engines powered up, Daniels glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of her crew. Each of them had a role to play in what was coming, and each of them carried the burden of knowing that this wasn't just about survival. It was about the future of every living being on Earth. "Everyone, buckle up. It's going to be a rough ride," she said, her voice resolute. The crew nodded, the fear in their hearts now replaced with determination. They had no choice but to face the unknown head-on. The ship lurched as it entered the atmosphere, and the crew braced themselves for the perilous journey back. The weight of the black ship's power was still pressing on their minds, but the crew was united. They were humanity's last hope, and they knew it. Their strength had been tested, and the black ship had shown them what they were truly capable of. But the battle had only just begun. As they broke through the clouds and descended toward Earth, Daniels couldn't help but wonder what awaited them. The ancient powers that had been hiding in the dark corners of the galaxy had awakened, and now they were on Earth's doorstep. But humanity wasn't just going to survive. They were going to fight back. "Let's show them what we're made of," Daniels whispered to herself, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The crew had done the unthinkable. They had awakened the black ship, and now they had to make sure that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory. As the black ship entered Earth's orbit, Daniels knew that the story of humanity was far from over. They had been underestimated. But now, the entire galaxy would see what humanity was truly capable of. The war had begun, and they were ready for it. But in the depths of space, unseen and unknown, the enemy forces were already moving. And this time, they were coming for Earth with everything they had.